Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of Grid Live pre-race for the Duels at Daytona. I'm Ben Schneider from Grid Live Encore and NASCAR.info. With me is Alex from the Gay Racing Podcast and Amanda Kaufman. We want to thank all of our viewers, as always, especially our Patreon supporters, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Your support means the world to us and allows us to continue to grow what we have here at Grid Network. And if you like what you see tonight, you can consider joining them, or if you'd rather make a one-time donation, you can visit the Buy Me a Coffee links in the description box below, or contribute through Super Chat if you're watching live on YouTube. We've got two dual races to preview that'll be happening here in just a couple of hours. But first, let's recap last night's single car qualifying session. And Amanda, I'll hand it over to you to get us started on that.
All right. Well, last night's single car qualifying session for the 66 Daytona 500 had a few surprises, including Chevrolet's pole winning streak coming to an end. For the first time since 2012, a Chevrolet driver will not lead the field to green at the green flag at the start of the Great American Race. Team Penske's Joey Logano won the pole, while Michael McDowell from Front Row Motorsports qualified second. During the offseason, it was announced that Front Row formed a technical alliance with Team Penske. Are you surprised that Ford locked out the Front Row, and is that a good early sign for the new Penske FRM alliance?
Yeah, I am pretty surprised by this. I thought for sure Hendrick was going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 again. I honestly had William Byron going for the pole, and Bowman was going to continue his streak of Front Row starts, but not happening. We're going to get more into Hendrick in a moment, but Ford, how impressive. What a debut here for the new car. And how about Penske and Front Row Motorsports, and announcing an alliance today. That's been in the works before this, and it was already going. But wow, Michael McDowell putting on the Front Row. I wasn't too surprised by that. That just seemed like, oh yeah, Michael McDowell, really good at super speedways, and that team just continues to get better and better. But one heck of a debut for Ford in that new car and to kick off that alliance. So overall, not too surprised, but cool to see.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it was Ford that picked up the slack, specifically Team Penske and Front Row Motorsports, who now are closer aligned than they've ever been. And Front Row, I'm very excited to see what they can do this season. They're going to have more backing and more support than ever on the heels of what Michael McDowell has done the last couple of years. But I guess the biggest surprise, which we'll talk about more in a second, is the fact that Hendrick isn't on the front row, and specifically Alex Bowman. With how strong they've been here these last several years on this night or during this single car qualifying session here, I expected another front row lockout, or at least one of them to be on the front row. And maybe, Stenhouse has gotten up there a couple of times in his JGD Doherty car, which has some Hendrick support. So, that's more the big surprise to me. It's not so much, I would have been really surprised if it was Toyota, considering the weaknesses that Toyota sometimes has here in single car qualifying. They've obviously shown well in the race. Denny Hamlin's won this race 3 times in the last, 8 years or so. But it's just qualifying that they tend to struggle in. So I'm not surprised it was Ford that picked up the slack, but I think the bigger story is the fact that it's not Hendrick Motorsports for once on the pole for the Great American Race.
Well, you bring up a great point, Ben, that whenever we come to Daytona for qualifying, most people definitely expect to see a Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet starting on the front row or pole even. But neither of this happened this year, and Kyle Larson was the fastest Hendrick car in 3rd place. Chase Elliott was 5th, and William Byron in 6th, with Alex Bowman all the way back in 17th. So you kind of touched on it a bit, but Ben, were you expecting more from Hendrick in qualifying?
Again, it sounds crazy to say that for a team that had 3 cars in the top 6, but yes, I was. And that's not a knock on the results that they had yesterday. It's just the bar that they've set for themselves and the standard that they've set in this qualifying session here these last several years. The bigger surprise to me is Alex Bowman. Bowman being down in 17th, that's, square in the middle of the field here. Even you look at his teammates, obviously they're disappointed not to have their starting positions secured and not be on the front row and have to wait for the duels tonight to figure out where exactly they're going to be starting. But, to still have 2 cars in the top 5, 3 in the top 6, that speed is there. With Alex Bowman, who specifically had a 6-year streak ever since he has been running full time for Hendrick, there hasn't been a year yet where he hasn't been on the front row for this race. And not only did he miss out on that, he fell all the way back to 17th, didn't even get a chance to go for the pole in the 10-car shootout in round 2. So that's the big surprise to me out of all of this. It's a surprise not to see Hendrick on the front row, but to see Bowman all the way down in 17th, that was the real shocker to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Everything you said on Bowman. It's kind of bizarre. I don't recall anything off happening in his lap either. So it just looked like a pace thing with the 48. But I do want to raise a question to you guys with this. I wonder, is this Hendrick Motorsports maybe leaning more toward race trim rather than trying to knock out qualifying? Because Chad Knausmeet had a quote a few years ago saying, well, the boss man wants the Daytona 500 pole. That's really important to him. Is this them being like, okay, well, actually, we want to try winning this race, not just focus all in on qualifying? Do you think that could be kind of what's going on here? I mean, 3 of their 4 were still in the top 6. Don't get it twisted, but it's like, I do have to wonder if that's not what's going on.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because if you think to what really matters, and that's winning the race, they haven't done that in a full decade now. Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 2014 is the last time that they actually won the race. They've won so many poles, they've been on the front row so many times, but they have struggled to back that up over the course of the 500 miles, or as Kyle Busch can certainly remind you from last year, sometimes even a little bit longer than that. But I think that, that's an interesting consideration, that, maybe they are trying to prioritize that a little bit more while not totally sacrificing. I mean, clearly, like you mentioned, 3 cars still up there in the top 6. They haven't totally sacrificed that single car speed, but maybe trying a slightly different setup that they hope is going to benefit them more when it comes time for the race.
Yeah, great point. And I'd have to agree with everything that's been said, that qualifying, while important, obviously from Hendrick's success in past years, being able to show up quick and qualify quickly and put it on pole doesn't necessarily translate to race wins. So here at Daytona, at least. So yeah, I think they've shifted to put a little bit more focus on winning the race. Well, there are 42 cars entered for 40 spots, meaning 2 drivers will go home at the end of the night. And there are 6 drivers in open cars this year. They are Jimmie Johnson, Anthony Alfredo, BJ McLeod, Kaz Grala, David Reagan, and JJ Yeley. Alfredo and Reagan ended up locking themselves into the Daytona 500 already. So, Alex, which driver of the remaining do you think has the best chance to make some noise this week? Alfredo or Reagan?
I mean, between the 2 guys that you just mentioned that are already locked in, I think David Reagan is the easiest answer here, but I do have a question with him. Is he a bit more behind because he hasn't been consistently behind a car? Is he still going to have it in him? But he's with RFK. I think that's probably the best shot of these open drivers. Like, hey, do you have a shot to actually go win? I would say RFK and David Reagan would have the best shot of these guys. So I would say him, but with some caution. Anthony Alfredo could be a true dark horse in this race. A 62 is always pretty solid on these super speedway races, that whoever the driver is, always fairly dark horse if they can make it into an event. But if I had to make a pick here, I do like Kaz Grala as well, because, I mean, Front Row Motorsports, we just talked about them. They have that new alliance with Penske. They're really good on the super speedways. And Kaz Grala has been trying to get a ride. I believe he had a really good run at a super speedway last year, if I remember right. So he could be someone to watch as well. And he's going to have teammates such as Michael McDowell, who's really going to be able to give him a lot of advice and be able to push him in the race and everything. And lastly, I also want to mention Jimmie Johnson. If we're going to talk about that in our next question as well, but if Jimmie Johnson doesn't make the Daytona 500, that is a huge, huge story.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I want to say it's Anthony Alfredo, because I think that Beard Motorsports, like Hendrick Motorsports, always brings a lot of speed to these races. They, go all in on the super speedway races because it's really the only races they do. I know they've done, Michigan a couple of times, and Atlanta as well, which basically races like a super speedway nowadays. But this is really their bread and butter, is coming out here 4 times a year to Daytona and Talladega. But I have to say it's probably David Reagan, because of what you just said there. He has more experience. He has 2 teammates in Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher, who are very good super speedway racers in their own right. Alfredo obviously doesn't have that. I mean, think about it this way: David Reagan has more teammates on the track than Beard Motorsports has full-time employees. They only have 1 full-time employee at that entire race team. So it's certainly the little team that could when it comes to Beard Motorsports here, and they frequently punch above their weight. But when it comes to actually having that experience and who's going to finish higher in the race, my money would probably be on Reagan as well.
Yeah, and I also want to shout out BJ McLeod, who's also attempting. He's now an open car. They don't have that charter anymore. I don't know if they'll make the race, but that'd be a really good feel-good story. They have no sponsor on the 78 right now. I'd be rooting for them if you want an underdog tonight. I would really be looking at BJ McLeod. And the other driver we haven't mentioned at all is JJ Yaley. We didn't know he was going to be in this race until literally yesterday. So that's an interesting story as well with the 44. I don't think I would pick them to make it in unless some chaos happens, but anything can happen.
Anything can happen, that's for sure. And it looks like some of these drivers have an uphill battle to make it into the show. But speaking of surprises, one of the biggest surprises from qualifying was Toyota's lacking singles car speed, with Eric Jones ended up being the fastest Toyota driver in 22nd place. And we know that Toyota and Ford brought new bodies into 2024 with the Camry XSC and the Mustang Dark Horse. Ford previously said that they gave up some of their advantage on the super speedways to make gains on other types of tracks, but they still ended up claiming the front row during qualifying. With that being said, then, are you concerned about Toyota's lack of single car speed, or do you think it won't really matter once they're drafting in the big pack?
I'm not really too concerned. I mean, you think of, the success that Denny Hamlin has had here in this race, winning it 3 times. Bubba Wallace has quickly become a very strong super speedway racer as well. I think when, and of course now you've got a little bit more strength in numbers adding legacy this year. So I think that when you get them into the big pack for the big race at Daytona, I think that they're probably going to pick up some speed there and still have enough speed to be able to work their way up through a draft and contend for the win. It's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle at the start of the race, but this race is so long, you got 500 miles, and anybody who works the draft right is going to have enough time, and you can work some strategy in there as well to position yourself, all throughout the race. I'm not too concerned about it when it comes to the race itself. Obviously, as we'll talk about later on in the show, Jimmie Johnson's got some bigger concerns tonight with the position that he's in. Unfortunately, not for him not being able to lock himself in on speed yesterday. So that's going to be an interesting storyline to follow, and I bet that they're wishing they had a little bit more horsepower under the hood tonight for that purpose. But again, even with the field size being half of what it's going to be on Sunday, hopefully on Sunday, we might get to the weather discussion a little bit later as well. But even with the reduced field size, I still think there's going to be enough cars out there that they can make those gains up towards the front and try to get Jimmie in the field tonight.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm concerned about anyone. I don't know if I'm excited about Ford either, because these are their brand new cars, but it's just qualifying. Things are a bit different. We've seen that with Hendrick dominating in Daytona 500 qualifying years past, but then other super speedways, it's a different story. So, I mean, I don't think we'll really know anything. I'll be concerned if, like, tonight in the duels, Toyota's just out to lunch or Ford isn't that good as they used to be. That's when I would start to get concerned. But right now, I mean, we don't really know a lot. We haven't had any practice, which I think NASCAR should bring practice back in some capacity
100%.
Before they, do a race or qualifying. But I'm not too concerned yet. But Toyota, I think their main priority tonight is going to be trying to get Jimmie Johnson into this race. And as you said, Ben, they have more cars. This is going to be more cars than they're going to have at any other super speedway race, unless Jimmie Johnson adds another, because he's a third Legacy Motor Club car, and they're not going to have that extra car at any of the other super speedway races. So they definitely want Jimmie Johnson to make it in, especially on debut for Toyota.
Yeah, I echoing what you guys just said. I don't think there's any reason to be concerned at this stage. I'm sure Toyota is focusing more on race trim than qualifying like they do most years. So with that, I'll throw it to you, Alex.
All right, well, let's talk about the first duel that's happening tonight. Joey Logano and Kyle Larson are going to be lining up on the front row, while Logano's teammates at Team Penske, they'll be in the second duel without him, while Kyle Larson will have teammate Chase Elliott up front to work with them. However, there'll be more forwards for him to work with starting inside the top 10, like Todd Gilliland, Ryan Preece, and Chris Buescher. We know Logano is an aggressive superspeedway racer who isn't afraid to make bold moves, but he also has a pole-winning car to take care of tonight. So Ben, let's start with you here on this question. Do you see Logano playing it safe by getting the car home in one piece, or will he still go all out for the win despite the risks?
I don't know if playing it safe is in Joey Logano's DNA, to be honest. I think that he's a true racer at heart, and I think we've seen it in this very race a couple of times. I think that Joey Logano is still going to go out there, even knowing the risk of maybe having to go to a backup car. He wants to go out and see how his car is going to handle in the pack, and especially given the point you just made, Alex, about not having any sort of practice time before you qualify for the biggest race of the year. I mean, how crazy is that? So I think that he's going to want to use this as some sort of test session or practice session, knowing that, again, unless he wrecks or something or loses an engine, has to go to a backup, his starting spot is locked in. I think it might actually energize him to want to be a little bit more aggressive and see what his car can do in the pack and get ready for the race on Sunday.
Yeah, I agree that this him knowing where he's going to start and everything frees him up a little bit to try different things and experiment a little bit before the big show. But yeah, if he were smart, he would definitely take care of that car and not take too many big swings or risk anything that would jeopardize his performance.
For sure. Now let's talk about Anthony Alfredo. He's locked in on speed, or the open cars. Jimmie Johnson and JJ Yaley. They'll be the other two open cars trying to race their way in Duel 1. Yaley will have to race in no matter what because he was a last-minute addition to the grid with New York Racing. If Alfredo is the highest finishing open car, then Johnson can fall back on his speed. The same can be said for the number 60 Ford if David Reagan also beats the other open cars in Duel 2. Thankfully, Jimmie Johnson will have several Toyota teammates in Duel 1 to work with: Eric Jones, Martin Truex Jr., Ty Gibbs, and Tyler Reddick. So, Amanda, let's start with you on this one. Do you anticipate the Toyotas really working together to help Jimmie Johnson get into the show? We've kind of talked about this a bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like we said, with the addition of Legacy, being added onto the Toyota group, I think that helps them out. And so they're going to be working to have as many Toyotas in the show as possible, because that's kind of what you need is manufacturers that work together is what we've seen before. And with Toyota being one of the smaller groups, they can't really afford to not have people make the race. So yeah, I definitely think that they're going to do what they can to make sure that Jimmie Johnson gets locked in.
Yeah, well, I've just seen this comment come in on our live chat from Get a Grip asking, is Johnson not making it into the playoffs? Not a shocker. I assume you mean making it into the 500 on speed. Not a shocker given the Toyota's pace. And I think that's what we were talking about earlier in the show, that Toyota has struggled historically in this qualifying session. You look at where his Toyota manufacturer teammates are. We were talking about Eric Jones down in 12th place, Martin Truex Jr. down in 14th, Ty Gibbs 15th, Tyler Reddick with 23, 11, and 19. So they're all down there in the second half of the field. It's not like Jimmie was the only Toyota that was struggling for pace there. I think it's certainly not a surprise that he's in this position given the lack of pace that the entire Toyota teams have all shown during this qualifying session. So I imagine that, like we were just talking about a little bit earlier, that pace is going to pick up a little bit when we get into the pack, when they have the ability to work together. And I think they are going to work together to try to get Jimmie Johnson into this field and make sure he can add another Daytona 500 start to his resume.
And if I can just say about Jimmie Johnson, I don't know if his pace in qualifying necessarily correlates to the race, as we kind of talked about. With is Hendrick pushing more toward race trim? We don't really know. Qualifying in the race with super speedways they're so different, and they're so set up different. So it's hard to say. But I kind of alluded to it earlier. If Jimmie Johnson were to miss this race, I would say it would be shocking, no matter what, even if he was like the slowest guy, which he's not. But if he was the slowest guy against Jimmie Johnson, it would be a huge shock. It'd be a huge news story for sure.
Well, there's only going to be a few people that get this inside joke from one of my group chats, but there is one man in sports you do not bet against: Christopher Beltram Hernandez, JJ Yaley. I somehow would not be surprised if that New York Racing entry. I mean, I just feel like he is the perfect journeyman driver for a team like this. We've seen it with Connor Daly last year getting in with a car that was porpoising worse than the Mercedes W13. We saw it with New York Racing a couple of years ago when Greg Biffle got into this race. You never know what's going to happen in these duels. Yep. And Connor Daly making the 500 last year because the other two open cars in his duel both got taken out in the same accident. I mean, that could very well happen with Jimmie Johnson and Anthony Alfredo, and JJ Daly gets that transfer spot, and that's it right there. So we're just going to have to wait and see. We'll know in a couple of hours what ends up happening. But let's transition here to the second duel, and hopefully you all can still hear me. I keep getting those notices that my internet might be dipping a little bit, so hopefully our connection's all good there. But in the second duel, we have two Ford drivers, Michael McDowell and Austin Cindric, who will lead the field to the green flag. There are plenty of fast Fords in this race. The Blue Ovals have 9 of the top 12 starting spots, as you can see on the screen. However, Riley Herbst, Noah Gragson, and Josh Berry will be 3 drivers to keep an eye on. Herbst really took a step forward last year in the Xfinity Series, showing tremendous growth as a driver, and he eventually found victory lane in his hometown. He was also impressive in the Super Speedway Cup races in which he entered. Gragson returns to NASCAR with Stewart-Haas Racing after a difficult rookie campaign that saw many growing pains and culminated in an indefinite suspension. Now he's out to prove that he's matured during his time away from the garage and belongs at stock car racing's highest level. Berry, meanwhile, was the only SHR driver not to make it into the Busch Light Clash a couple of weeks ago. He, of course, is tasked with replacing Kevin Harvick in the number 4 Ford for SHR. Amanda, we'll start with you. Which one of those 3 drivers do you think will have the strongest finish tonight?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I could make a pretty good case for all of them, but I think what I'm most interested to see is how Noah Gragson performs. Definitely, sophomore season, new team. He's been out of the seat for quite some time, so yeah, I'll be most interested to see what Noah Gragson can pull off tonight.
Well, to answer the question, pull up a random number generator between 1 and 3, put it in, whichever number you get, that's my answer for the question. But I mean, I echo what Amanda just said. I feel like Noah Gregson's going to be really interesting to watch this year because Stewart-Haas Racing, they're not in a good place right now. And I am very curious to see how he handles not necessarily the pressure, but the attention that's going to be on him after everything that has happened to him. He's going to be at a bigger team, I would say, than what Legacy was a year ago. So it's going to be very, very fascinating for sure. And also this weekend, Riley Herbst, I think, is getting better and better every year. I wouldn't rule him out as like another dark horse to potentially contend for this win. And I don't have much to say about Josh Berry, but I think if you want to talk about pressure, I think he's the guy's going to have a lot of pressure on him replacing Kevin Harvick. But that's something to watch for throughout the whole season. For this weekend specifically, pull out the random number generator. I have no idea.
Well, of course, it was only 2 years ago, but Austin Cindric had about as much Cup experience as somebody like Riley Herbst or even Josh Berry, who has made some sporadic starts for the last several years. Cindric was doing that in 21 in the 4th Penske car. He comes out in 22, taking over the 2 for Brad Keselowski, and goes out and wins the biggest race of the year. So it is certainly a possibility here this weekend for the Daytona 500. Let's catch up on the chat room real quick before we move on. Is Van Gisbergen racing this weekend? He is. He'll be in the ARCA race and the Xfinity race, and we'll talk about what could come up with the scheduling there in just a moment. First, Adam Lemery, if Jimmie Johnson misses Daytona 500, it would be a huge story. You could get people who don't normally talk about NASCAR talking about that. I think that's very much true as well. And then Get a Grip asking here, how do you feel they are going to schedule out the races with the weather looking rough? That's a very good question. I would imagine you probably don't want to have like an undercard race the same day as the Daytona 500. So that could make it a little bit tricky, more tricky than it normally would be if you have multiple races get rained out. If you actually want to bring up Van Gisbergen, the only reason he's really running the ARCA race is to get approval to run the Xfinity Series race. So that could be an interesting dynamic if we get weather on Saturday. But I don't know if either of you have actually heard anything. I know that it's been a conversation on social media with the forecast looking the way that it is.
I will say regarding Shane Van Gisbergen, Bob Pockrass has tweeted that like, hey, Shane Van Gisbergen, as long as he does like a practice session, he should be fine. And he has for Daytona. So he should be fine for the Xfinity race, according to Bob Pockrass at least. But regarding all this, I don't think they'll actually do this, but after what we saw at the Clash, like, could they move the Xfinity race to Friday? Because Friday looks a lot better than Saturday does. But I don't think they're going to move anything around until they absolutely have to. They're going to go back to how they used to do it before the clash. So I don't know. But Monday looks good so far. So we'll have to wait and see on what the forecast actually does. And it's Florida. Things could change and it might not even rain at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are the two things right there. I don't see them moving a race up like they did with Clash. I mean, I think that was a very unique circumstance. It was clear that it was going to rain nonstop really for 3 or 4 days straight. And the teams being all the way out in Los Angeles, they had to find a way to get it in before that happened. In this particular case, Monday does look much better than the weekend does. And even then, like you mentioned, Alex, you're in Florida. They don't know what it's going to be doing 5 minutes from now, let alone in 2 or 3 days. And, pop-up showers and how long they're going to last. And pass right through, and it can be sunny in turn 3 and raining over in turn 1, like we saw a couple of years ago when the entire field, save for Austin Dillon, got taken out in a wreck because they were too hesitant to throw a caution flag. Who knows what's going to happen with the weather, but it's going to be an interesting talking point for the next several days, I'm sure, as it normally is any time of year in Florida. That's just the nature of where NASCAR's biggest race happens to take place here. Let's move on here. Let's talk about RFK Racing's David Ragan. That's the driver that's already locked in based on yesterday's speeds. In the second duel, he can fall back on his speed if needed. BJ McLeod is fourth in line to get on speed. Kaz Grala has to race his way in no matter what. Of course, he didn't even get to really take a time in yesterday's qualifying session. In the third Front Row Motorsports car, it's certainly got to be a tough situation for him, having seen his teammates Michael McDowell and Todd Gilliland starting on the front row and being 11th quickest, respectively. So, Alex, I'll start with you. Does this, despite this setback from qualifying, do you still like Grala's chances of getting into the 500 by beating Ragan and McLeod on track?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. I really do like Kaz Grala's chances as long as they figured out the problem that they had that, they could have resolved those practice NASCAR. I'm just saying. But if I think Kaz Grala's got a really good shot. I think working with Michael McDowell, he's going to be getting a lot of feedback from him and a lot of tips and everything. I like his chances, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy by any means. But if I had to pick one, I think it'd be harder to beat Ragan because, Ragan is locked in, but Ragan needs the experience to get caught back up. He hasn't been in one of these cars full time in quite a while. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah, I have to agree that I think that Grala has pretty good chances, pretty good odds against McLeod especially, but Ragan is the one he really has to probably focus on beating, racing in. But I think that where his teammates sit is a pretty good, that should give him some hope, and he should be able to pull this off.
Yeah, very interesting dynamic manufacturer-wise as well, because you kind of have a manufacturer teammate with David Ragan and Kaz Grala, although they certainly are not going to be teammates tonight with what's at stake, trying to lock their way into the 500, although Ragan can, of course, fall back on his speed. Alex, let's hand it over to you now for everybody's favorite game. It's time for Pick a Winner.
Yeah, that's right. Let's pick a winner let's pick 2 winners. It's time for the Pick a Winner. We're going to pick 2 winners for Duel 1 and Duel 2. Let's start with Duel 1. Amanda, we have the starting lineup. I'm pointing the wrong way. On the left side of the screen. So who are you picking for Duel 1?
Yeah, such a toss-up always with this game. But I guess just based on past experience and strengths and the way they qualify, I mean, I'm just going to go Joey Logano. I think that he has some help up there in the form of other manufacturers. And yeah, it should be interesting to see how the Hendrick cars work together in the beginning. But yeah, I'll just play it safe and pick Joey Logano.
Well, he might not be starting on the front row, but maybe he'll settle for the second row here in 2024. I'm going to go with Alex Bowman. I think he's got to be fired up after having a very disappointing Wednesday, given his past success in Daytona 500 qualifying over the last 6 years. And I think he'll find a way to the front. But again, as you both kind of alluded to, you might as well just play the game Alex was playing earlier, pick a number between 1 and 3. Here it might be pick a number between 1 and 21 because of just how unpredictable these races can be sometimes.
For me, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson. I think you're going to see the 3 Hendrick cars in this duel really work together. You're going to stay nose to tail, all 3 of them, the entire time. And you're going to be seeing a preview for the Daytona 500. And Adam's agreeing with me on Kyle Larson. We'll see about Duel 2. But yeah, I'm going with Kyle Larson for Duel 1. And Amanda, would you like to kick us off with Duel 2?
Yeah, another toss-up, but I think for this one, I'm just going to solidly go with Austin Cindric. I think that, I don't know, they showed up. They always do well here. It's really such a toss-up, and I'll probably be proven wrong in about an hour here. But yeah, that's my pick for Duel 2.
You know, I like RFK's chances based on how they've performed here in the duels in the last couple of years. But you know, I guess I'll stick with the Hendrick Motorsports team here and just roll with William Byron. But again, you know, it's very difficult to predict a winner in this race given the nature of super speedway racing.
See, I like William Byron, but he doesn't have any help. That's why with Larson and Duel 1, this duel, Byron won't have much help, if at all. I think Kyle Busch could be helping him. But for me, you mentioned it. One of you mentioned it, RFK. I think those two are just going to be... Because Buescher is in this one, right? Am I not mistaken? I'm looking. Maybe not. But I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. Maybe I'm just saying something wrong anyway. But Brad Keselowski, man, is just so good on these super speedways. And I'm going to go with him for Duel 2. Michael McDowell, though, is going to be really, really tough to beat. And yeah, Buescher's in Duel 1. So I just said something counterintuitive what I was just arguing. But it's fine. Brad K.
You got an extra car with that stage 60 entry, so there is still going to be that team factor. And David Reagan, I think, can maybe take more risks because he can fall back on his speed. So we'll just wait and see what happens there. But going to be very interesting to follow the duels tonight. So we will let you all go and get ready for that and enjoy that. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for tuning into our show before the duel races. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, please be sure to support us, follow us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter/X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, LinkedIn, Threads, most importantly, right here on YouTube. Thank you so much for helping us grow over these last couple of months here, even during the off season when there isn't as much racing going on. We are slowly, and I shouldn't even say slowly anymore because of how much support you guys have shown us. We're moving closer towards that ultimate goal of 1,000 subscribers and beyond. So if you are watching and you're not subscribed right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell as well to be notified every time we host a new show or upload a new video. And again, if you really liked what you saw, you can consider taking a few minutes after the show to consider joining us on Patreon. Join Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew in supporting the Grid Network team, helping us get some more races on site on a more regular basis, which will only expand the coverage for you, the viewers. Or if you'd rather make a one-time donation instead, you can visit Buy Me a Coffee or donate through Super Chat or Super Thanks on YouTube as well. And again, the weather could play a little bit of a factor this weekend, but we will still have coverage for you no matter what happens with a special Daytona 500 pre-race show on Sunday. And then, of course, Grid Live wrap-up and Grid Live Encore to follow later in the weekend. Hopefully, Sunday night and Monday evening, respectively, again, weather permitting. And if there are any delays in the racing, we will, of course, update you as to how that affects our schedule as well. For Amanda Kaufman and Alex Anderson from the Gay Racing Podcast, I'm Ben Schneider from Grid Live Encore and LastCar.info. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll leave you with one final comment from our chat from John Bender. I hope Jimmie makes the 500. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of Jimmie Johnson fans watching the duels very closely tonight as well. So we will let you get to the duels. Thanks again for supporting us here on Grid Network.